Part 1, Chapter 1 of Family Happiness. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Family Happiness by Leo Tolstoi. Translated by Nathan Haskell Dole. Part 1, Chapter 1. Sonia and I were in mourning for our mother, who had died in the autumn, and we had spent the whole winter in the country alone with Katya. Katya was an old family friend, our governess, who had brought all of us up, and whom I had known and loved ever since my memory began. Sonia was my younger sister. The winter at our old house in Pokrovskoye was dreary and forlorn. The weather had been cold and blustery, so that the snowdrifts were heaped high above our windows. The panes were almost constantly covered with frost, so that nothing could be seen out of them. We had been kept housed almost all the time. It was rare that any friends came to see us, and if they did, they brought no increase of joy or cheer to our home. All wore long faces and spoke with subdued voices as though afraid of awakening someone. All refrained from laughing, but they sighed and often shed tears and looked solemnly at me, and especially at little Sonia, in her black frock. The presence of death still seemed to be felt in the house. The grief and horror of death were in the very atmosphere. Mamma's chamber was shut up, and I felt a sensation of pain and also a strange impulse to look into that cold and empty chamber when I passed by it on my way to bed. At that time I was 17, and Mamma, the very year that she died, was intending to move to the city for the sake of bringing me out. The loss of my mother was a terrible grief for me, but I must confess that there was associated with it the feeling that I was young and pretty, for everybody told me so, and that it was a pity to have wasted another winter alone in the country. Before the end of winter, this painful sense of loneliness and tedium increased to such a degree that I refused to leave my room. I kept the piano shut and never took up a book. When Katya advised me to do this thing or that, I replied, "I don't wish to, I can't." And the question arose in my soul, why? Why do anything when the best days of my life are thus going to waste? Why? And to this question there was no other answer than tears. They told me that I was growing thin and losing my beauty, but even that made no difference to me. Why? Who was to see? It seemed to me that my whole life was destined to be spent in this dull solitude and helpless gloom, from which I had no power or even desire to make my escape. Toward the end of the winter, Katya began to worry about me, and resolved when the opportunity offered to take me abroad. But in order to do this we needed money, and we had a very dim idea of what our mother had left us, and therefore we waited from day to day for our guardian to come and settle up our affairs. In March he came. "Now, thank the Lord," said Katya to me one day, as I was wandering about from room to room like a shadow, idle, listless, aimless. "Sergei Michailitch has come. He sends to inquire after us and will be here to dinner. Come now, show a little energy, my dear Masha," she added. "Otherwise what will he think of you? He's so fond of you both." Sergei Michailitch was a dear neighbour of ours, and a friend of our late father, though he was much his junior. Not only would his coming change all our plans and enable us to leave the country, but from childhood I had been accustomed to love and honour him, and so when Katya advised me to show a little energy, she knew very well that it would mortify me more to appear in an unfavourable light before him than before any other of our friends. Moreover, not only did I share the traditional attachment for him felt by everyone in the house, from Katya and Sonia, whose godfather he was, down to the stable boy, but in my eyes he had a special interest, owing to a word which my mother had dropped in my hearing. She had said that she would like nothing better than to find such a man as a husband for me. At that time her words struck me as strange and disagreeable, for my hero was quite a different sort of man. My ideal was graceful, slender, pale and melancholy, while Sergei Michailitch was no longer young, was tall and stout, and, as it seemed to me, always cheerful. Still, these words of Mamasha's struck my imagination. 6 years before, when I was 11, he had addressed me by the familiar "ty," thou, had a romp with me, and called me Little Maid Violet, and ever since I had occasionally asked myself, not without dread, what I should do if he suddenly asked me to become his wife. Before dinner, for which Katya had prepared a cream pie and a spinach sauce, Sergei Michailitch arrived. From the window I saw him drive up toward the house in his light sleigh, but as soon as he disappeared around the corner I hastened into the reception room, wishing to make it appear that I was not anxiously awaiting for him. But as soon as I heard the sound of his feet and his hearty voice, and Katya's steps, I could not refrain from running out to meet him. He was holding Katya by the hand and talking in his deep voice. A smile was on his face. When he saw me, he paused and gazed at me for some little time without bowing. I felt awkward and was conscious that the colour was rising in my face. "Ah, is that really you?" he exclaimed in his simple, straightforward manner, holding out his hands and coming towards me. "Can it be possible you have changed so much? How you have grown! Where is my violet gone? Now you are a full-blown rose." He took my hand in his big hand, pressed it so firmly, so heartily that it almost hurt me. I supposed he was going to kiss it, and I bent toward him, but he merely pressed it again and looked straight into my eyes with his frank, merry glance. I had not seen him for 6 years. He had changed much, had grown older and darker, and now wore side whiskers that were very unbecoming to him. But he had the same unaffected manners, a frank, honourable face with large features, intelligent, brilliant eyes, and an affectionate, almost childlike smile. In 5 minutes he had ceased to become a stranger, and all of us looked upon him as though he were a member of the family, even the servants, who seemed delighted at his coming, as was evident by their desire to serve him. His behaviour was entirely different from that of the neighbours who came after Mamash's death, and who felt constrained to speak in whispers and to shed tears while they were in the house. He was talkative and jolly, and did not say a word about mother, so that at first this apparent indifference struck me as strange and even unbecoming in a man who had been so intimate with our family. But afterwards I discovered that it was not indifference, but sincerity, and I was grateful to him for it. In the evening, Katya sat down in Mamash's old place in the parlour to pour the tea. Sonia and I took our seats near her. Old Grigori brought him one of Papa's pipes that had been put away, and just as in days gone by he began to walk up and down the room. "How many terrible changes in this house when you come to think of it," he exclaimed, and stopped short. "Yes," said Katya with a sigh, and putting the cover on the samovar, she looked at him and almost burst into tears. "And I suppose you remember your father?" he asked, turning to me. "A little," I replied. "And how much you would be to each other now," he continued, looking gently and thoughtfully at my forehead and hair. "Your father was a very dear friend of mine," he added, in a still gentler voice, and it seemed to me that his eyes became more luminous than ever. "Well, it seemed good to God to take her also," rejoined Katya, and immediately she laid her napkin on the teapot, took out her handkerchief, and began to sob. "Yes, terrible changes in this home," he repeated, turning away. "Sonia, show me your toys," he added, in a moment or two, and went into the drawing-room. With my eyes brimming with tears I looked at Katya as he went out. "Such a splendid friend," was her answer. And in truth I felt a sensation of warmth and comfort around my heart at the thought of this good friend. As we sat in the parlour we heard Sonia's piping voice and his merry romping with her. I poured out his tea and heard him sit down to the piano and begin to touch the keys with Sonia's little fingers. "Maria Alexandrovna," I heard him say, "come here and play me something." I liked the simple and friendly way in which he laid his commands upon me. I got up and went to him. "Here, play this," said he, opening the copy of Beethoven to the Adagio of the Moonlight Sonata. "Let us see how you play," he added, and went with his glass of tea into the corner of the room. For some reason I felt that with him it was useless to refuse or to make excuses for playing badly. I sat down obediently at the piano and tried to play to the best of my ability, though I was afraid of his criticism, for I knew that he understood and loved music. The Adagio corresponded with the sentiment of the reminiscences awakened at the tea-table, and I imagined that I played tolerably well, but he did not ask me to play the scherzo. "No, you wouldn't play that well," said he, coming up to the piano. "No matter about it, but you didn't play the first badly. You must have some comprehension of music." This praise, which was certainly not extravagant, so delighted me that I blushed. It was such a novel and pleasant experience for me that a friend and equal of my father should talk seriously with me as though I were worthy of his notice, and no longer as with a child, as used to be the case. Katya went upstairs and put Sonia to bed, and we two remained in the drawing-room. He told me about my father and what a bond of sympathy united them, and what a happy life they led in those days when I was a mere child, amusing myself with picture books and dolls. And his stories made me see my father for the first time in the light of a simple-hearted and lovable man, such as I had never thought of him before. He also asked me about my tastes, my reading, and my ambitions, and gave me advice. He was now no longer merely a merry, jesting playmate, teasing me and making toys for me, but a grave, earnest, and lovable man, to whom I felt involuntarily drawn through affection and sympathy. While I talked with him I felt perfectly at my ease, and enjoyed it, but, at the same time, I could not help feeling a certain strain upon me. I was afraid for every word that I spoke. I had a strong desire to be worthy of his affection, which hitherto had been given to me simply because I was my father's daughter. After putting Sonia to bed, Katya rejoined us, and complained to him of my apathy, of which I had said nothing. "It seems, then, she has failed to tell me the principal thing," he said with a smile, and shaking his head reproachfully at me. "Why speak of it?" said I. "It is very stupid, and besides, it will pass away." It actually seemed to me that at that moment my sense of lassitude not only would pass away, but that it had already passed away, and that I had never suffered from it. "It's unfortunate not to be able to endure solitude," said he. "Aren't you a grown-up young lady?" "Of course I am," said I with a laugh. "Well, she's a poor kind of young lady who is lively only while she is admired, and, as soon as she is alone, loses her spirits and takes no interest in anything, all for mere show and nothing for reality." "You have a fine opinion of me," said I, for the sake of saying something. "No," said he, after a little silence. "It is not all in vain that you look like your father. There's something in you," and again his kind, penetrating eyes gave me a flattering look, and filled me with a strangely agreeable confusion. Now for the first time I noticed that his face, which had impressed me as being so jovial, had a look peculiar to himself, serene at first, but afterwards becoming more and more thoughtful, and even rather gloomy. "There is no reason and no propriety in your being downhearted," said he. "You have your music, which you understand, your books, and your whole life lies before you, and now is the only time in which you can prepare yourself for it, so that you will have nothing to regret. In a year it may be too late." He talked to me like a father or an uncle, and I was conscious that he had constantly to exercise self-control not to look down on me. I felt offended that he considered me beneath him, and at the same time it pleased me that he found it worth while for my sake, and my sake alone, to make an effort to show his friendship in this way. The rest of the evening he talked business with Katya. "Well, good-bye, my dear friends," said he, getting up and coming over to me and taking me by the hand. "When shall we see you again?" inquired Katya. "This spring," was his reply. He still held my hand. "Now, I'm going to Danilovka." That was our other estate. "I shall look into your affairs there and make what arrangements I can. Then I'm going to Moscow on some business of my own, and then in the summer we shall be here again." "Now why must you be gone so long?" I asked, feeling terribly blue. In fact, I had hoped that we should see him every day, and suddenly I felt so depressed and sad that all my former unhappiness seemed to return. This must have been expressed in my eyes and voice. "Try and busy yourself as much as you can, and don't get downhearted," said he, in a tone which seemed to me altogether too cool and natural. "When spring comes I shall make you pass your examination," he added, dropping my hand and not looking at me. In the ante-room, where we were standing while he put on his shuba, again his eyes seemed to search me. "It's no use for him to take so much trouble," said I to myself. "I wonder if he thinks I like to have him stare at me in that way. He's an excellent man, very. But if only—" For a wonder it was very late when Katya and I went to bed, and we talked all the evening, not about him, but about how we should spend the coming summer, and where or how we should live next winter. My bugbear of a question, why, did not recur to me. It seemed to me very simple and clear that one ought to live to be happy, and I imagined that the future would bring much happiness. Suddenly, as it were, our Pokrovsky house, so old and gloomy, presented itself to my imagination overflowing with life and light. End of Part 1, Chapter 1.